They don't tell you about them in history class. The textbooks are silent, the stories erased. But in the South China Sea, long before and long after the golden age of piracy in the Caribbean, there were women whose names turned tides, whose fleets dwarfed the navies of empires, and whose shadows still haunt the waters today. These were not damsels or delicate figures hidden behind silk screens. They were commanders, warlords, lovers, and betrayers, pirates, who carved their kingdoms with blade and cannon. Their banners carried by storms. Imagine this. The year is 1809, and the Qing dynasty's navy sails out, determined to crush a pirate confederation that has strangled trade routes, plundered cities, and defied emperors. On the horizon, black sails rise not dozens, but hundreds. A floating city of pirate junks, each bristling with cannon, each rowed by hardened men. At the center is not a king, not a bearded terror like Blackbeard, but a woman. She stands at the prow in crimson silk robes, her hair bound in jade, her face calm as stone. This is Zheng Yi Sao, warrior, and soon to be the most powerful pirate in history. She commands 80,000 outlaws, her word law across the South China Sea, her fleet unmatched even by Britain or China. And she was not the only one. The waters had known them for centuries, pirate queens who commanded loyalty through fear and love, through cunning alliances and ruthless punishments. They burned cities, held governments hostage, and rewrote the laws of piracy itself. And yet, while men like Bartholomew, Robert, and Blackbeard are remembered in legend, these women's names were buried beneath waves of silence. Was it shame that the empires of Europe and Asia had been humbled by women? Or was it fear that their stories, if told, would inspire new rebellions, new fleets, new queens of the sea? Tonight, I'll tell you what was never meant to be told, the forbidden history of the pirate women of the South China Sea, their rise, their betrayals, their wars, their hidden fates. And it all begins not with Zheng Yi Sao, but with the blood-soaked alliance that gave her power, because the first secret you must know is that she was not alone. The South China Sea was a crucible of storms and blood at the turn of the 19th century. Empires rose and fell upon its waters, junks heavy with silk and silver sailed through, and every coastline trembled beneath the black banners of pirates. Among them was Zheng Yi, a feared commander who had clawed his way to dominance through alliances with rival clans, cunning deals, and ruthless raids. But it was not Zheng Yi alone who shaped the tides, was his wife, a former courtesan whose wit was sharper than any blade. She was known simply as Zheng Yi Sao, the wife of Zheng Yi, but soon the world would know her as something far more. When Zheng Yi fell during a storm in 1807, drowned beneath the same waves that had carried his fortune, chaos threatened to tear his fleet apart. The pirate confederation he commanded, known as the Red Flag Fleet, was vast but fragile. Alliances with other pirate families could shatter in an instant. His death should have meant the collapse of everything he had built. But Zheng Yi Sao did not grieve like other widows. She gathered the captains of the confederation, men hardened by years of bloodshed, and walked into their council with fire in her eyes. "You think my husband's death leaves you free," she said, her voice cutting through the din of pipes and clattering cups. "But you are wrong. I am his heir. I am your commander now." Laughter broke out, coarse and cruel. Pirates leaned back on cushions, their hands toying with knives. A woman commands the greatest fleet in Asia. It was madness. But then she produced her true weapon, not a blade, but a man. At her side stood Chung Po-sai, Zheng Yi's adopted son and rumored lover, a fierce and loyal commander whose name carried weight among the sailors. His allegiance to Zheng Yi Sao silenced the room. "You follow him," she said, pointing to Chung Po-sai, "and he follows me. Defy me, and you defy the fleet. Defy the fleet, and you drown." In that moment, the widow's gambit was played. Zheng Yi Sao seized command not by sword, but by politics binding loyalty through fear, love, and inheritance. She divided plunder with a ruthless fairness that earned her respect. Captains received their share, crews their cut, and any theft outside the division was punished by death. Desertion, death, rape without permission, death, disobedience in battle, death. Her laws were iron, her punishments swift, her fleet more disciplined than any navy, and soon her power grew. The red flag fleet swelled to over 300 junks, then 600, then nearly 1,800. Her forces numbered 70,000 men and women, far greater than the imperial navy sent to crush them. Entire villages swore allegiance, paying tribute in exchange for protection. She became not just a pirate, but a ruler. Her word law across the sea. The Qing dynasty tried to crush her. They sent fleet after fleet, but their ships burned beneath her cannon fire. The Portuguese tried to hunt her, but her junks swarmed them like hornets. Even the British masters of the ocean watched with wary respect. For a time, the South China Sea belonged not to any emperor, but to a widow in crimson robes. But power never comes without enemies. Whispers spread of jealous captains, of rivals in the black and white flag fleets who plotted against her. Some said Chung Po-sai's loyalty was bound more by passion than strategy, and passion burns hot but fades fast. Others claimed the Qing were not the only hunters. The sea itself resented a woman ruling in its name, and so, while Zheng Yi Sao's empire grew, shadows grew with it. The question was not whether she could rule, but whether she could keep her crown when the knives came out from within her own fleet. And one night, in a hidden cove lit only by lanterns and the scent of lotus wine, those knives began to gleam. The red flag fleet stretched across the South China Sea like a kingdom afloat. Nearly 2,000 junks moved as one under crimson banners, their sails blotting out the horizon. In the villages along the coast, fishermen spoke Zheng Yi Sao's name with fear and reverence, offering tribute of rice, silk, and silver in exchange for safety. The Qing navy dared not sail without trembling, for each time they sent a squadron to crush her. The waves returned, blackened hulls and shattered masts. She ruled not as a pirate, but as a monarch, her laws sharper than steel and her justice swifter than storm winds. But empires at sea are never without cracks. Beneath the crimson banners, whispers spread like rot in the hull of a ship. Not every captain loved their iron-handed commander. Not every clan had bent the knee willingly. Zheng Yi Sao's laws kept order, but order is a fragile thing among men who lived by plunder, and in the smoky holds of junks anchored far from her flagship, knives were drawn and plots were spun. It began with the black flag captains, old rivals of the red flag clan. Absorbed by force into Zheng Yi Sao's confederation, they bristled under her authority, resenting her laws that stripped them of freedom. Once they could drink, fight, and take what they pleased. Now they were bound by her decree: no plunder without division, no assault without sanction, no desertion without death. She ruled them as an emperor ruled provinces, and they cursed her for it, One captain, a scarred brute named Long Ma, spat into his cup as he leaned close to his fellows in a lamplit cabin. "We kneel to a woman," he growled. "A woman who thinks herself queen of the seas. Are we dogs, to bow for scraps while she and her pretty boy, Chung Po Sai, sit in silk?" His words rumbled like thunder among the men. They had seen Chung at her side, his hand never far from hers, his loyalty fierce. Too many, he was her shield and her leash upon them. "We should slit her throat while she sleeps," one muttered, fingers brushing the hilt of his dagger. But Long Ma shook his head. "Kill her, and the fleet tears itself apart. We need captains, not chaos. No better to cut away her power, piece by piece, until even Chung cannot save her." So the conspiracy took root. Black flag captains began withholding tribute, skimming silver from raids, turning their crews restless. They whispered poison into men's ears, that Zheng Yi Sao grew rich on their backs, that she shared her bed with Chung, while their bellies went hungry, that her laws were shackles forged of greed. And slowly, unrest spread like fire in dry reeds. Zheng Yi Sao felt it. She always did. Her instincts, honed in the cutthroat world of Macau's brothels before she ever set foot on a ship, were sharp as any blade. She watched the faces of her captains as they bowed, their smiles tight, their eyes wary. She saw the subtle delays in tribute, the murmurs when she passed. Chung urged her to act swiftly. "Hang Long Ma from his own mast," he whispered one night as they drank lotus wine aboard the flagship. "Let the sea see what becomes of traitors." But Zheng Yi Sao only shook her head. "A dead man proves nothing. A dead man cannot confess. No, Chung Wei will let him weave his rope tighter. When he hangs, it will be by his own weight." The chance came sooner than she expected. In the summer of 1808, word reached the fleet that a convoy of Qing treasure ships was moving south, guarded by imperial junks heavy with cannon. It was a prize too rich to ignore, and Zheng Yi Sao called her captains to council. In the smoky belly of her flagship lanterns swaying, she laid out her orders. "We strike at dawn. The convoy will be trapped in the narrows. Chung will lead the spearhead. Long Ma Yu will hold the rear." Long Ma bowed, his smile thin, his eyes gleaming. He had already resolved that the fleet would fail. His plan was simple. When the red flag fleet met the Qing convoy, his ships would hold back, letting the vanguard bleed without support. Then, in the confusion, he and his black flag allies would seize their chance either to let Zheng Yi Sao fall in battle, or to swoop in as saviors and claim glory for themselves. Either way, her grip would loosen. But Zheng Yi Sao had read his heart before he ever opened his mouth. When the battle dawned, the Qing fleet lay glittering in the narrow channel, sails white against the morning sun. Zhang Yi Sao's armada surged forward, cannon thundering, arrows darkening the sky. Chime's junks cut through the vanguard like blades through silk, and then Long Ma's ships lingered, their sails slack, their men watching. Now, Long Ma roared, "Let her bleed." But as his ships idled, waiting for chaos, Zheng Yi Sao's flagship turned sharply, cutting across the waves with terrifying precision. Her cannon belched fire not at the Qing, but at Long Ma's fleet. Shot after shot tore through his sails, splintered his hulls. His men screamed in disbelief as their supposed allies turned on them. And over the thunder of guns, Zheng Yi Sao's voice carried across the water like iron. "Traitors feed the sea." The trap was not hers, was his. She had suspected betrayal, and she had prepared. While Long Ma faltered, Cheng pressed the attack, his men boarding Qing junks, cutting down soldiers in a frenzy of steel. By midday, the convoy was shattered, the sea thick with burning wrecks and bodies. Zheng Yi Sao's fleet had triumphed, but Long Ma's ships lay in ruin, his men dead or chained, dragged before her on the blood-soaked deck. Long Ma spat defiance even as his face ran with soot and sweat. "You think you are queen of the sea," he sneered, "but the men follow you only because they fear you. Fear will break, and when it does, you will drown." Zheng Yi Sao regarded him coolly, her crimson robes unstained, her hair still perfect despite the smoke swirling around her. She leaned close, her voice soft as silk. "You are wrong. They follow me because I am the sea." And with a flick of her hand, Long Ma was hauled to the mast. Before the assembled fleet, he was lashed, beaten, and finally beheaded, his skull nailed to the prow as a warning. His crew watched in silence as their captain's blood dripped into the waves. No one dared move. No one dared speak, but in the stillness after the storm, Zheng Yi Sao felt the weight of what she had done. She had crushed betrayal, but the whispers would not die so easily. For every captain who knelt, another waited in the shadows. And Cheng, ever loyal, pressed her again. "The knife will come again, my love. We cannot watch every hand, every whisper." She sipped her wine, eyes dark as the sea. "Then we will not wait for the knife. We will hunt it." That night she summoned her spies, courtesans, smugglers, fishermen who owed her their lives. She spread them across the fleet, ears open, knives hidden. And soon whispers reached her, of rivals still plotting, of captains swayed by foreign coin, of envoys from Portugal seeking to buy dissent. The knives in the dark were many, and Zheng Yi Sao vowed she would break each one, no matter the cost. But power is a tide, and tides always turn. Her enemies were not only within her fleet, they were circling from outside, empires unwilling to bow to a pirate queen. The Portuguese, the British, the Qing began to sharpen their blades. And in the midst of these storms, Zheng Yi Sao would discover that betrayal was not her greatest enemy. Her greatest enemy was trust. For even Chung Po sighed the man who loved her. The man she trusted above all would soon be tested in ways that would shake the Red Flag Fleet to its core. The Red Flag Fleet ruled the South China Sea like an empire adrift. Its junks blackened the horizon, its cannons silenced imperial patrols, and its crimson banners sent merchants trembling into submission. For a time, Zheng Yi Sao's power seemed untouchable. She was not merely a pirate queen. She was a monarch without a throne, the sea her palace, storms her crown. But empires do not suffer rivals long. Beyond the horizon, enemies gathered, the Qing humiliated, thirsting for revenge. The Portuguese, desperate to reclaim trade routes, strangled by her fleet, and the British, ever hungry to carve their dominance into Asia's waters. Each plotted not only her downfall, but the erasure of her name. The first to move were the Portuguese. From Macau, their cannons had long threatened coastal villages, their fleets patrolled like wolves, guarding stolen ground. To them, Zheng Yi Sao's rise was a direct insulter, woman commanding more ships than Portugal could muster, taxing their merchants, humiliating their sailors. They whispered to the Black Flag remnants who had survived Long Ma's downfall, offering coin and sanctuary in exchange for treachery. Slowly, alliances formed in shadows, sharpened by gold. Zheng Yi Sao knew. Her spies carried whispers back across the waves. Portuguese officers sharing wine with bitter captains, Ching envoys slipping silver into greedy hands. She listened in silence, her face unreadable, while Chung Po Sai bristled with fury beside her. "Give me their names," he hissed, gripping the hilt of his dao. "I'll cut their tongues from their throats before they can sell us." But Zheng Yi Sao raised a hand. "Not yet. A dead traitor teaches little. A living one teaches much." Her patience proved wise, for within weeks a storm gathered. The Portuguese, allied with Qing vessels, launched a surprise strike at the Pearl River Delta, hoping to catch the Red Flag fleet scattered. But Zheng Yi Sao had foreseen it. As their ships pressed into the narrow channels, they found themselves ensnared not by chance, but by her design. Hidden junks poured from coves and mangroves, cannon fire splitting the night. The Portuguese line broke, Qing soldiers screamed as arrows rained down, and by dawn the river boiled with wreckage. The coalition's defeat was absolute, but victory carried poison. Among the captured prisoners was a Portuguese lieutenant who, under threat of fire and blade, confessed that envoys from both Britain and Qing court had promised rewards to any captain who would betray Zheng Yi Sao. The plot was larger than she'd guessed. It was no longer about pirates defying the Qing. It was about empires conspiring to strangle her power before it became permanent. That night, in her cabin lit by lanterns, Zheng Yi Sao sat with Chung Po Sai across a lacquered table stained by maps and spilled wine. The smell of salt and smoke hung in the air. Chung's face burned with passion, his hand pounding the wood. "We cannot fight all of them. The Portuguese, the Qing, the British, they will come again and again until they grind us to pieces. We should strike first. Burn Macau to ash, raid Canton until the emperor himself bends. Show them fear." Zheng Yi Sao studied him, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "And when the fear fades, fear alone cannot rule. No, Chung. We must be more than raiders. We must be sovereigns." Her words fell like stones. Chung's eyes widened, half in awe, half in doubt. "Sovereigns? Yes," she said, her voice low and steady. "We already govern. Villagers pay us tribute. Merchants sail under our banners for protection. Why not more? Why not make it law? If the empires conspire to erase me, then I will make myself impossible to erase. Not a pirate queen, but a ruler of seas." But to achieve such a vision, she needed loyalty unbreakable. And it was here the cracks began to show. For though Chung loved her, his fire often burned too bright, too rash. Where she saw strategy, he saw conquest. Where she wove alliances, he drew his sword. And among the captains, whispers spread. Was it Zheng Yi Sao's cunning that led them more? Was it Chung's sword arm that held them together? One evening, as lanterns swayed above the fleet anchored in a moonlit cove, Zheng Yi Sao overheard those whispers herself. A drunken captain, bold with rice wine, laughed too loudly. "She wears the robe, aye, but it's the boy who wears the crown. Without Chung, she's nothing but a widow in silk." The words reached her like a knife. She said nothing then, but later that night, in the quiet of her cabin, she turned to Chung. "Do they follow me or do they follow you?" Chung stiffened. "They follow us both. Both is not enough," she said. "If I am to stand against empires, there can be no doubt." His silence told her the truth she feared. The fleet was hers, but her power was braided with his. If that braid frayed, the sea would devour them both. Her chance to test it came sooner than expected. In the spring of 1809, the Qing struck again, this time with Portuguese ships at their side. Their combined fleet descended upon the mouth of the Pearl River, cutting off Zheng Yi Sao's access to critical trade routes. It was a massive gamble, a coalition born of desperation. If they could pin her in the delta, they might starve her fleet, choke her power, and scatter her men. The battle raged for days. Cannon, thunder rolled across the water, arrows darkened the sky, ships crashed and splintered. Zheng Yi Sao stood at the prow, her crimson robes snapping in the wind, her commands cutting sharp as steel. Chung Po Sai led boarding parties, his blade flashing, his fury unchained. Again and again, the coalition reeled before their fury. But on the third day, a storm broke. Black clouds ripped across the sky, winds shrieking, waves heaving. In the chaos, Zheng Yi Sao's flagship was cut off, isolated among enemy vessels. Her captains scattered, the tide against her, the storm tearing order to shreds. And in that moment, Chung made his choice. He abandoned his post in the battle line to reach her. Driving his ship through the gale, he rammed an enemy junk aside, leaping to her deck, drenched in blood and rain. "I will not let them take you," he roared, cutting down soldiers as lightning split the sky. Together, they fought side by side, their fury turning the tide. By dawn, the coalition was broken, their fleets limping back to port. Shattered once again, the fleet roared in victory, but Zheng Yi Sao was silent. In saving her, Chung had disobeyed her direct command, leaving his squadron leaderless in the heat of battle. Dozens of her men had died because he chose her above them. And though her heart thundered with love for him, her mind burned with fury. That night, as the fleet celebrated, Zheng Yi Sao summoned him privately. Her gaze was steel. "You saved me, but you defied me. My command must stand above your love, Chung. If it does not, we are finished." Chung stared at her, torn between passion and pride. "Would you rather I let them kill you?" "I would rather die a queen," she said coldly, "than live as a woman saved by her lover." The words cut deeper than any blade. And though they shared the same bed that night, a shadow grew between them. She needed him, but she needed loyalty more. And beyond the horizon, the empires were not finished. They had failed to crush her with ships and steel. Now they would turn to subtler weapons, diplomacy, bribery, betrayal. They would not only test her command, they would test her heart, for even the strongest pirate queen could bleed not from the blade of an enemy, but from the dagger of the one she trusted most. The year after the storm battle in the Pearl River Delta was one of uneasy silence. The Red Flag Fleet remained unbroken, their banners still crimson against the sea. But Zheng Yi Sao knew silence was never peace, was plotting. Defeated at sea, her enemies turned to subtler weapons. The Qing dynasty, humiliated again and again by her victories, sent envoys bearing scrolls of silk and words dipped in honey. The Portuguese, licking their wounds in Macau, whispered of truces while sharpening knives. Even the British, cautious yet calculating, began to send traders and spies cloaked as diplomats. Zheng Yi Sao summoned her captains to council. The air inside the flagship's cabin was thick with smoke from incense and pipes, the floorboards sticky with spilled wine. Maps sprawled across the lacquered table, stones weighing the corners. The captains bickered like gulls, their voices rising in drunken boasts and suspicions. "They offer peace," sneered one, his face scarred from a Portuguese cannonball. Peace from a throne that cannot beat us in war is no peace at all, it is a chain. Another grumbled, what if the chain is lined with gold? The Ching offer amnesty, titles, rice, land. Why spill more blood when we could live as lords? The room fell to silence as Zheng Yi Sao stood, her crimson robes glowing in the lamplight. Her voice was calm, but it cut sharper than steel. Amnesty is a lie. The Ching do not forgive. They fear us. They call us outlaws, yet they cannot destroy us. They promise land, but land is a cage. They promise titles, but titles rot when emperors die. The sea alone does not lie. The sea alone is free. The captains bowed their heads, cowed by her fire. But in the silence that followed, a seed of doubt was planted. For freedom was sweet, but so was survival. And some wondered if the widow in silk had grown too bold, daring to stand forever against empires that could outlast any fleet. Chung Po Sai, standing at her side, clenched his jaw. He whispered later that night, when only the lanterns and the sea were listening, "You cannot hold them forever, my love. They grow tired. They long for rest, for homes that do not float. If the Ching offer it, some will take it." Zheng Yi Sao's eyes hardened. Then those who would take it will be revealed, and once revealed, they will not live to betray me. Her prophecy came true within months. One autumn evening, a secret letter arrived aboard a fishing skiff intercepted by her spies. It was sealed with the crest of the Ching. Inside was a bargain, a promise of titles and estates for any captain who delivered Zheng Yi Sao into imperial hands. The ink was fresh. The betrayal was near. That night, she called a feast aboard her flagship. Lanterns burned bright, wine flowed like rivers, roasted duck and pork perfumed the air. Captains laughed, sang, and gambled, their suspicion drowned in drink. But when the hour grew late and the moon hung high, Zheng Yi Sao stood, raising her cup. "Tonight we feast as brothers," she said, her smile radiant. "Tomorrow we hunt as wolves. But tonight we test loyalty." At her signal, her guards swept in, blades flashing. 3 captains were seized, their faces pale with shock. From her sleeve she drew the intercepted letter, unrolled it slowly, and read the names written there. Gasps rippled through the room. The traitors struggled, cursing, but her gaze was cold iron. "You would sell me to the Ching," she said, "but you forget he was born in a house where betrayal was currency. I can smell it on your breath before you speak. And tonight, the sea will have its due." The 3 captains were dragged to the deck, bound in chains, and hurled screaming into the black water. The fleet watched in silence as the sea swallowed them. Zheng Yi Sao turned to the rest. "This is the bargain of the dragon," she said, her voice ringing like thunder. "The Ching promise land and gold. I promise freedom and power. Choose your master, but know this. The sea will remember your choice." The fleet roared their allegiance, their fists pounding on the deck, their voices echoing into the night. But Zheng Yi Sao saw the unease in their eyes. Fear was a weapon, but it could not bind men forever. And then came the offer she could not ignore. In the spring of 1810, a British envoy arrived under flag of truce. His ship, white-sailed and bristling with guns, anchored just beyond cannon range. He came aboard, dressed in naval blue, his boots polished, his words dipped in courtesy. Bowing deeply, he presented her with a scroll sealed in red wax. "Her Majesty's government," he said in flawless Cantonese, "recognizes the strength of your fleet. You rule the seas from Hainan to Macau, but the tide of history moves, and empires rise. Britain offers alliance, trade, protection, even recognition. All we ask in return is that your fleet refrains from disrupting our merchants, and perhaps aids us against your enemies. It was a dangerous offer. To ally with Britain was to place herself against the Qing, against Portugal, perhaps even against her own captains who despised foreign masters. Yet to refuse was to risk isolation. Zheng Yi Sao smiled politely, sipping her tea, her mind racing faster than the tide. Chung Po Sai bristled openly. We need no foreign masters. We bow to no empire. But Zheng Yi Sao's silence was more dangerous than his fury. She dismissed the envoy with promises of consideration, and when he was gone, she turned to Chung. If the Qing and Portuguese seek to break us, why not let Britain shield us? An empire for an empire. A bargain for survival. Chung's eyes burned. And what happens when Britain decides you are no longer useful? Do you think they will share power with a pirate queen? They will use you and discard you. Her lips curved in a cold smile. Then I will use them first. But the cracks between them widened. For Chung saw honor in defiance, while Zheng Yi Sao saw survival in cunning. And her fleet, though loyal, now whispered louder than ever. Was their queen leading them to greatness or selling them to the highest bidder? One night, as thunder rolled across the horizon, Zheng Yi Sao lay awake, listening to the sea beat against her hull. Chung slept beside her, restless even in dreams. And she knew the truth that gnawed at her heart. The greatest threat was no longer the Qing or the Portuguese. The greatest threat was trust itself, trust in her captains, trust in her lover, trust in the bargain she had made with the sea. Because bargains with the sea always came due, and as lightning forked across the sky, she heard it a whisper, low and cold, carried on the wind. The dragon's bargain is not with empires. It is with me. She sat up, her skin prickling, her breath shallow. For a moment, she thought she saw a face in the lightning, a crown of waves, eyes like stormfire. Was it madness or prophecy? She could not say. But she knew one thing: the sea would test her again, and next time, no bargain would save her. By 1810, the South China Sea was no longer just a hunting ground for pirates, it was a battlefield of empires. The Red Flag fleet had grown so vast it resembled a floating city, yet even floating cities can burn. Zheng Yi Sao had weathered betrayal, crushed rivals, and faced empires head-on. But storms are not always of wind and tide. Some storms gather in whispers, in diplomacy, in the slow grinding of exhaustion. Her empire, built of terror and loyalty, now strained beneath its own weight. The Qing dynasty had grown desperate. Their armies could not crush her, their fleets could not outfight her, and every defeat weakened their legitimacy. But they had another weapon: patience. They knew pirates lived by plunder, and plunder demanded trade. So the Qing and Portuguese tightened their harbors, blockaded key rivers, and spread fear among merchants. Slowly, the flow of silver and rice grew thin. Zheng Yi Sao's fleet, once fat with spoils, began to feel hunger gnaw at its belly. Sailors muttered over empty bowls. Captains, restless and wary, looked to their queen with questions burning in their eyes. The Portuguese struck next, wielding rumor like a blade. They spread tales in Macau that Zheng Yi Sao had already made secret deals with the British, that she was preparing to abandon her men and sail away in luxury, leaving them to hang. Lies spread faster than truth, and some of her captains began to believe them. Zheng Yi Sao countered with discipline, punishing those who dared speak treason, but each execution only deepened the unease. And then came the moment that shook her core. One of her spies, a fisherman she had trusted for years, returned trembling, bearing news. Chung Po Sai had met in secret with a Qing envoy. The fisherman swore he had seen it Chuang speaking quietly on a hidden beach, the envoy bowing low before handing him a sealed packet. Zheng Yi Sao's blood froze. That night, she confronted him in their cabin, the lantern throwing harsh shadows across their faces. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "Did you meet with the Qing?" Chung's jaw tightened. "I met him, yes, but not to betray you, to listen, to measure their desperation. They offered amnesty for me, for you, for the fleet. I refused." Her eyes narrowed. "You should have told me. You should have come to me first. I feared your fury," he admitted. "And I feared what it would mean to the men if word spread. They are tired, Sao. They dream of land, of homes, of peace. If we fight forever, even victory will taste like ash." Her heart twisted. She loved him, had always loved him, but love could not stand above command. "Do you think I built this fleet to beg scraps from emperors?" she whispered. "Do you think I will crawl back to a throne that never wanted me?" Chung's eyes burned with pain. "And if clinging to the sea destroys us all, what will you rule, then ashes and bones?" The silence between them was heavier than cannon smoke. They lay side by side that night, but a gulf wider than any ocean yawned between them. Days later, the gulf grew wider still. In the Pearl River Delta, the Qing gathered their might. With Portuguese support, they deployed a fleet of war junks and European frigates, blocking every passage, sealing Zheng Yi Sao in. For weeks, the Red Flag Fleet tried to break through, their cannons roaring, their junks crashing like waves against the barricade. But each time, the empires pushed them back. The blockade tightened. Hunger worsened. Morale frayed. Zheng Yi Sao gathered her captains one final time. The council chamber reeked of sweat and smoke, the faces around her gaunt, their eyes rimmed with suspicion. She stood tall, crimson robes draped like fire. "This is no blockade," she declared. "This is a test. The Qing thinks we will kneel, but we will show them our teeth. One last strike, one last storm, we break their line, or we die free." But the captains did not roar in agreement. They muttered, exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one voice rose, a weary old sea wolf with scars across his cheek. "We are not afraid to die," he said, his voice heavy. "But our men are." They whisper of surrender. They whisper of amnesty. And whispers, my queen, can drown even the loudest roar. Her fury burned, but beneath it was dread. She dismissed the council, but the words lingered in her chest like poison. The whispers had spread too far. Even among her own fleet, faith was splintering. The final storm broke in November of 1810. The Qing, reinforced by Portuguese firepower, surged into the delta with overwhelming force. Cannons thundered, smoke blanketed the water, ships collided in chaos. Zheng Yi Sao's flagship charged the line, her voice carrying above the din, for the red flag, for freedom. Chung fought beside her, his blade flashing, his fury unmatched. For hours they held the tide, but slowly the truth revealed itself. Some of her captains faltered, Some held back, and some whispered traitors turned their sails and fled. The red flag fleet, vast and mighty, began to fracture. Zheng Yi Sao fought like a goddess of war, her robes torn, her hair unbound, her commands cutting through cannon fire. But even gods cannot hold back the ocean when it turns. By dusk, the fleet was broken. Hundreds of junks burned, thousands of men dead or scattered. The empires had not crushed her completely, but they had shown her the truth. Her reign could not last forever. That night, as she stood on the deck staring at the wreckage, Cheng came to her. His face was pale, his hands stained with blood. "It is over," he said softly. "If we fight again, we will lose all. If we surrender, we may yet live." She turned to him, her eyes blazing. "Surrender is chains." "No," he said, gripping her hands. "Surrender is survival. If you live, you can rule again. If you die here, you will be nothing but a ghost." For the first time in her life, Zheng Yi Sao's resolve wavered. She had built an empire from nothing, commanded more ships than emperors, bent the sea to her will. And yet, here at the edge of defeat, she felt the weight of every life she carried pressing down upon her shoulders. She had sworn to be the sea itself, but even the sea must sometimes bow to the storm, and so, through clenched teeth, she whispered the word she had never thought she would utter. "Then we surrender." But even surrender would not come without a price. The morning after the battle in the Pearl River Delta dawned grey and hollow. Smoke curled above blackened waters, broken masts jutted from the tide like grave markers, and the cries of gulls echoed over the charred remains of once mighty junks. The red flag fleet, the terror of the South China Sea, was no more. Some ships had fled, some burned to cinders, others drifted aimless, their crews surrendering to the imperial banners rising over the horizon. For the first time in years, Zheng Yi Sao's name carried not thunder, but silence. She gathered what remained of her loyal captains in the hushed belly of her flagship. The air was thick with ash and despair. Even Chung Po Sai, her ever-fierce companion, looked weary, his eyes rimmed with sleepless red. Zheng Yi Sao stood tall, crimson robes now frayed and stained, but her bearing still unbroken. "We cannot win another battle," she admitted, her voice a blade against the quiet. "But neither will I crawl like a beaten dog. If we bend, it will be on our terms. If we surrender, it will be a queen's surrender." And so she played her final gambit. Word was sent to the Qing commander that Zheng Yi Sao herself wished to negotiate. The man, cautious yet eager for triumph, agreed. Under a sky heavy with storm clouds, Zheng Yi Sao came ashore not as a prisoner, but as a sovereign. She walked with measured steps, crimson robes sweeping the sand, her eyes steady, her back straight. Behind her marched Chung Po Sai and a cadre of loyal guards, their weapons sheathed but their presence unmistakable. The Qing soldiers, lined in ranks, shifted uneasily. They had been told to expect a broken widow, not a queen. The commander bowed stiffly, more out of fear than courtesy. Zheng Yi Sao inclined her head only slightly, her silence commanding more than any roar. In a tent striped with imperial silk, the two sides sat across from one another. The commander laid out the bargain. The fleet would surrender, the pirates disband, but mercy would be granted. No executions, amnesty for her men, and for Zheng Yi Sao herself. The emperor would allow her to live, provided she renounce piracy and fade quietly into history. But Zheng Yi Sao did not bow. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp as stormlight. My fleet is broken, yes, but my name is not. If you wish me to lay down my crown, then I demand guarantees. My men will not scatter into poverty. They will not be hunted like dogs. They will be allowed land, work, families. And I, she paused, her voice ringing with defiance, I will keep what is mine. The silver, the jewels, the spoils of years at sea. If I am to surrender, it will be as a woman who conquered, not as one who crawled. The commander hesitated, stunned by her audacity. No outlaw had ever spoken so boldly at the emperor's table. But the truth was undeniable. The Qing could not risk further war. The people were weary, the coffers strained. To crush her utterly might take years more, and the dynasty could not afford it. And so, incredibly, the bargain was struck. Zheng Yi Sao, pirate queen of the South China Sea, laid down her command, but she did so with wealth intact. Her men spared, her lover beside her. She had faced empires and bent them to compromise. It was not a defeat. It was a transformation. In the years that followed, her legend faded from the waves. Zheng Yi Sao married Cheng Po Sai formally, and together they settled in Guangdong. With her fortune, she opened gambling houses, tea houses, and trading firms. To her neighbors, she became a wealthy widow, a sharp-eyed businesswoman who dealt in silver and silk. To her old allies, she was still Mother Sao, the woman who had once commanded 80,000 souls. She walked the markets with quiet pride. A queen without a throne but with her crown unshaken, Kung restless without the sea. Eventually accepted amnesty from the Qing and even served briefly as a naval officer. A strange twist for a man who had once been pirate royalty. But Zheng Yi Sao did not return to piracy. She had played her last card and won not immortality, but survival, and yet mysteries remained. Some whispered she never truly left the sea. Fishermen swore that certain junks, black-sailed and unmarked, still appeared in hidden coves, their crews loyal only to her. Traders spoke of a veiled woman collecting tribute in the shadows, long after her supposed retirement. Even decades later, sailors claimed that storms in the South China Sea carried her name on the wind, as though the sea itself refused to let her vanish. Zheng Yi Sao lived into her 60s. A rare fate for any pirate, rarer still for one who had defied empires. Some said she died quietly at home, her fortune intact, her children at her side. Others swore she disappeared one night, her gambling house left empty, her fortune gone, her body never found. The truth, like the tide, has many faces, but one thing is certain: for nearly a decade, she was the most powerful pirate who ever lived, man or woman. She commanded more ships, more men, more fear than Blackbeard, Roberts, or Kidd combined. She rewrote the laws of piracy, ruled seas as empires quaked, and bent the might of nations to her will. And yet her story was buried, silenced, erased by those who could not stomach the truth, that the greatest pirate in history was not a man, but a woman. Tonight, you know her name. Zheng Yi, Sao the widow, the queen, the dragon of the South China Sea. She surrendered her fleet, but she never surrendered her crown, and perhaps, on nights when the sea roars and storms tear the coast, if you listen closely, you may still hear her voice in the thunder. I am the sea, and the sea cannot die. For years, official records insisted that Zheng Yi Sao died peacefully in 1844, a wealthy widow who retired into obscurity. That's the version the Qing scribes wanted preserved. the tale that empires were comfortable telling, that even a pirate queen eventually bent to domesticity, but scattered whispers suggest otherwise. A Portuguese trader in Macau wrote in his diary of a veiled Chinese woman who commanded black-sailed junks decades after Zheng Yi Sao's supposed death. British naval logs mention mysterious pirate raids in the 1850s, their leaders enforcing laws eerily similar to Zheng Yi Sao's infamous code. And in one Qing report, buried deep in archives, an official admits that her grave was empty, that when they went to confirm her burial, the coffin contained only sand and shells. So what truly became of her? Did she die quietly, a grandmother with a fortune of silver? Or did she vanish into the South China Sea, returning to the waters that had crowned her, waiting for the world to forget before raising her banners again? Some sailors swear that even today, if you sail the Pearl River Delta on a storm-tossed night, you can see lanterns on the horizon, rows upon rows of ghostly junks, and hear a woman's voice across the wind. The sea is mine still.